hey, $25,000 if you want to get this master's from University of Illinois. And University of Illinois is a great school. Like it's one of the best schools out there when you get into artificial intelligence in that stage. But I have a challenge to say, like, if I could take most of the same courses, and those courses I can audit for free, right? I can audit these courses on these platforms for free, and I have my work to show afterwards. How much difference is it going to make? Now, if my employer is paying for it, and that's a different capacity, and it helps create some motivation, but just, write a big check to have a degree, I'm more and more challenged of like, where's the value? Show me how this is going to be better than that.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast, where Justin Grammons and the team at Emerging Technologies North talk with experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and deep learning. In each episode, we cut through the hype and dive into how these technologies are being applied to real-world problems today. We hope that you find this episode educational and applicable to your industry, and connect with us to learn more about our organization at appliedai.mn. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. Today we have Dave Mathias. As you might recall, Dave was a guest back on episode 6, where we talked about data coaching and artificial general intelligence. Dave is a principal and founder at Beyond the Data and the Go Beyond the Data podcast, where he talks with experts across the world about leveraging human-centered and data-driven thinking. He's also passionate about education. The following audio are excerpts not published from the last interview, and one in which we discuss the wide array of online courses available to those eager to begin an exciting career in artificial intelligence and deep learning. There are so many courses available to those who are interested, and I hope that you as a listener are able to tap into many of the resources we discuss during this episode. So without further introduction, we'll start the interview here. Hey, Dave.
How's it going?
Good. Just trying to think where we want to start the conversation. I mean, in your career, I know you've been getting a lot in education and artificial intelligence. Curious to hear some more thoughts that you have around those concepts.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is there's so much stuff out there, right? So many people have done different things, whether it's under branded content, like under university banners, and they're putting it now on Coursera or edX. There's a lot of great stuff out on those types of platforms versus Udacities or Udemy's or all these things. So one person that I'm really excited about is Jeremy Howard and what he's doing with fast.ai.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you just go to the website fast.ai, you're going to find a lot of great content out there. And there's content around like straight machine learning, the traditional, random forest and other things that you might, utilize.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also all the sort of the deep learning type of stuff, vision, audio, translation, all that kind of stuff. And on that, he's sort of done a couple of things. One is the lessons that he's put up there for free. So the video lectures and experiments, and he's made his Jupyter notebooks available and all that kind of stuff, right? So you can go through all the learning yourself. In fact, I don't know if you know who Sam Charrington is with TWIML.
No.
This Week in Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I subscribe to that. I get that. Yeah. The name didn't click.
So Sam has a Slack group out there too. He's out of St. Louis, actually, Sam is. And as part of that, they've actually done a couple of different go through fast AI with a cohort, because it's always better to learn like this together. So my suggestion is, like, if you're looking to do this fast AI, certainly you can do it together, do it alone, or just do it with a friend, but maybe see if there's a cohort out there that you want to just do it along together, and you can better learn together more than, of course, just by yourself. So something just recommending to folks, whether you're in a company and a few of you want to go through it, or you want to have some friends, things like that, or check out if TWIML is doing anything like that recently. Maybe Applied AI might want to do something like that at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, there is actually a deep learning group here in town that Yaniv Ben-Ami has been running, and they meet every Sunday. I'll put a link to his meetup group here as well.
Nice.
But these open source things, I mean, yeah, you're right. There's so much out there. It's always better to learn off each other, right? I mean, sometimes you can get stuck. Many times you get stuck, and whether it's an online forum or whether it's a Slack channel or the Applied AI meetup group, right? All that type of stuff. Those are great resources to reach out to. How does Fast AI then make any money, or doesn't it? Is he just sort of doing this?
Yeah, so he's sort of created a fund. They're actually a research firm too. He's done a couple startups. I think he's done very well. Let's just say, from all appearances. And so I think part of this is really giving back things, but I think they get funded they actually do cutting edge research in artificial intelligence. And so they're getting paid in that at capacity somewhat, but the education part is completely free. And why you put fast AI, because in addition to the education, there is the abstraction component where you can use it like Keras. They have their fast AI that sits on top of it, where it's if you're basic programming skills, you'll be able to quickly get up to speed and put these models into practice, and you're not certainly hyperparameter tuning is always, especially when you're getting to deep learning, hyperparameter tuning can be that frustrating part.
Mm,
They've created fast AI in the sense of, okay, trying to minimize the amount of tuning that you need to do, but
yeah.
still getting very good results. So definitely recommend folks to take a look at there. But then there's always, of course, like on Coursera, and certainly I think it's deeplearning.ai that Andrew Ng now is going under, right? So
Yep.
he has
Yep.
his coursework, then it's also available in Coursera, and his AI for everyone. That's sort of the every person artificial intelligence training. Everybody should, like, if you're in business, if you're anywhere in your career, that's something you should take. It's not that long to go through. And I do think it gets people up to that basic level of competence so that they can at least have those conversations. But then, of course, if, there's artificial intelligence and there's typical, okay, do you want to just get better at certain business intelligence and those types of components? And there's a whole gamut of analytics learning that's out there, no matter how technical or business side focus that you want to get. Some that I'm actually a big fan of also on Coursera is through University of Michigan's courses.
Okay.
And they have some good courses around pandas, and even they have a really good Python course for somebody that's not has any experience in Python. So if you want to just get the basic programming capacities, and then you take the data science courses through University of Michigan on Coursera has been I think a good one too.
Yeah, it's funny. It seems like lots of universities have gone online. Whether it be
Mm-hmm.
Stanford or I saw University of Arizona. I've seen MIT. There's all these sort of
Yeah.
classes now because they can offer them online. These platforms. The tough thing is, I think the Stanford class was like 12 grand or something like that, right? And it's just like the prices can be high. I guess at the end of the day, my thinking is at least you get some sort of certification or something like what are your thoughts on that? I mean, so fast.ai, I go through this stuff, maybe I'll have a GitHub repo at the end, I'll have learned a bunch of stuff, but like I don't really earn a certificate per se, do I? And maybe do I need to?
Yeah, that's the question, is do you need to, right? So like the benefit of being in coding, if you're ever in that, like obviously you've been in that space for a long time through the mobile world and now into the artificial intelligence, IoT, you've done that all. And the nice thing is you get to show your work. I mean, it's like certain fields, you get to show your work. And I think having projects, being able to show your code, I think that matters so much more than any certificates. And I'm not like, certainly Peter Thiel is not always the best example of folks in some capacities, but at the same time, one of the things he's doing is like, hey, challenge the assumption that people need to be going through these expensive educational platforms to get a certificate that at the long run, honestly, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how much meaning will a lot of this technology is going to be different. Now, certainly a lot of fundamentals that you're going to learn at any school is like you're learning to learn, hopefully more than anything, which
Hmm.
I sometimes hate that statement, because I think we should just be curious people that are constantly take advantage of all this learning that's out there. So it's interesting. Like over the years, I've taken Coursera courses since it came out. I don't know how many years ago now. Well, I have multiple graduate degrees, and I feel like none of these things are things that like a client's going to hire me because I've taken. I do feel like I need to constantly be learning, both from a self satisfaction standpoint, but also because I don't want to be a dinosaur, right? Like, and in this field, you can quickly become a dinosaur without trying. My uncle, he used to work in the mainframe business, right? So he got his master's in mathematics, and right when he was coming out, I believe in the 70s, is when he came out of grad school, and then got into mainframes. Like they didn't have computer science generally in most universities at that point, and so he was doing got into mainframe programming, was able to do it his whole career, luckily. But that doesn't happen nowadays, right? Nowadays, it's not whatever you learn in college or right after came into your first job. It's going to be so different down the road. So
Yeah.
I'm very challenged. Like, and I see that a lot with Coursera or other platforms where they're trying to charge still, like, hey, 25,000 if you want to get this master's from University of Illinois. And University of Illinois is a great school. Like, it's one of the best schools out there when you get into artificial intelligence and that stage. But I have a challenge to say, like, if I could take most of the same courses, and those courses I can audit free, right? I can audit these courses on
Hmm.
these platforms for free, and I have my work to show afterwards. How much difference is it going to make? Now, if my employer is paying for it, and that's a different capacity and it helps motivation, but just to, write a big check to have a degree, I'm more and more challenged of like, where's the value? Show me how this is going to be better than that.
Good point. I mean, there's also certifications you can get. I'm just thinking back, like with regards to tool sets, right? So you can get certified in Azure's, stack. You can get certified in Google's. You can get certified in TensorFlow. You can,
Mhm.
PyTorch. I'm sure there's all these things you can just kind of get very, very focused on. And I guess the question is, do you think it's valuable to maybe start there and really go deep on a specific skill set, for example, because that
Mhm.
is marketable in a lot of ways. When you get done with that, you can literally search through job descriptions that say we need these
Yes.
skills, and you can say, aha, I satisfy these bullet points. And I guess it could be argued, well, if I went to a 4-year college and I did this and that stuff, I probably would span a number of different things. But you're right, coming out of school, sometimes you don't
Mhm.
actually get that deep on various things. Is that a problem? Because me as an employer, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but me as an employer, I am
Mhm.
looking for those hard skills. And so, is our college system failing us in some ways with what they're teaching?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. So I'm working with one of the universities right now in their master's program as we're updating a component of it, and one of it is trying to build in. We're trying to have the soft skills along with the technical skills in this update because there's a need for both, as we know. Like some people are going to have stronger in one or the other, but there's also some of those technical skills, those name brand things that in the job descriptions people want to see. Like you have experience with this, and can you check the box? Can you have somebody go into an interview and at least have a good conversation and at least have a starting point and some demonstrable work in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm by no means an expert in if I have a certification in X, my monetary value is Y in this marketplace. Because
Mm-hmm.
for one is I think that is a constantly changing thing. But I do think there's obviously I would talk to somebody that has in your marketplace, whoever's listening, somebody that has experience in those recruiting segments of, what does this type of certification resonate with in your area? Is it worth it? I do think those certainly, like a PMP, for example, with the project management, that certainly has a monetary value. On the other hand, like one of the spaces I've been in is product management, has less known monetary value. Now, some people will value it, don't get me wrong, but it's not so ubiquitous across the industry. So, whether a skill is ubiquitous or not, but certainly like Tableau certification
Mm-hmm.
is
Sure.
valuable in that space. But again, I would stress to anyone, don't get too far down a rabbit hole because technologies change, things change, and so at least place a few different bets as opposed to just placing one bet if you're going down that. And of course, there's like Tableau and Alteryx and of course SQL. Like if you have
Yep.
a few of those things, like that's probably enough bets to place. And if one of them goes away, you put another bet on something else where you pick up something else. I think we're telling people to be lifelong learners, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think our society, our educational system really wasn't developed to be lifelong learning. It was okay, you go through high school, and then now we're saying you can't just go get a job now. Now you need to go through college, your 4 years, and now we're even saying oftentimes now you need to go through masters, and oftentimes masters people they're going right after school or shortly after undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to adjust that some. There's a recognition that needs to be adjusted some. At the same time, we have a big business around the existing structure. So I'd love to see more boot camp places, more here. Like I'm leveraging these couple skills, and now I get to go to a job place. I was just doing like an Ask Me Anything. I was the person they had for this,
Uh-huh.
but it's basically like an analytics type boot camp, more towards data analysts, data engineers, that kind of group. The
Mm-hmm.
Dallas, Texas areas where the school is located, and so I was doing that there. But they do a lot around the soft skills, but they also are like, hey, here's the X amount of technical skills that you need to know these things. Their programs designed to get people internships right away.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 6 months in total, and I know there's a lot of these different boot camps that are popped up around the country, and I'd like to see more just to challenge the existing education system. 4-year degrees make sense for certainly a lot of things, but I think we need to be just more open of when does such a thing make sense, or when is it like this is constantly changing. So maybe 6 months, and then you go out and you're doing this for a couple of years, and maybe you go back for another few months for something else. to add on, thinking of that mentality.
That's great. I mean, I've done a 4-year degree, I've done a master's, but I also did a certificate program at the university through the University of Minnesota, and this would have been, oh man, probably getting into the late 90s, probably 97, 98 timeframe.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was all about Linux, C, C++, basically DevOps before it was called DevOps. And, the university was running this out of essentially a training center in Edina. And so I just went there for like a quote unquote boot camp. And now
Nice.
I'm showing my age, but that was like 23 years ago now. Now there's new names, there's new technology, there's new ways to do it. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of stuff in a very, very short amount of time. And I
Yeah.
paid for it out of my own pocket because I knew that learning VI, quite frankly, has been something that has changed my career. Right, I can log in any Unix system and use Vim VI,
Mhm.
and it's a thing that I use to this day,
Nice.
and it's a little skill that I learned. And I know a lot of people that don't know how to use it, and they're kind of like, I'm like, just learn it. It's just like for me, it's also like Java. Like, thank goodness I learned Java back 23 years ago as well, because it was just like, it's completely changed my trajectory. But again, it was one of these things where, yeah, I didn't learn that in school. Back then, they weren't really teaching Java. And so decided to take it upon myself to learn it. The lifelong learning thing is interesting too, because, a lot of people have the mindset, and I would say me included, I guess, outside of the certificate program and stuff like that, that I get done with school, I look back, I'm like, I'm done taking tests, and I just kind of walk away, right? There's just this sort of closure where you're like, I finished whatever degree I did, and the book is closed. And for me, I realize that I'm learning a lot, of course, during my career, but then there's also just focus learning. There's actually taking time aside every week, and I'm really trying to put that on my calendar, where it's just like, okay, during these chunks of time here, I'm literally going to block out everything and just use this as ongoing education time. So not
Mhm.
sure if you take that tact, or of anybody to take that tact, but I think for me, make a concerted effort to put it on your calendar. Otherwise it just won't get done.
Yeah, I think both, and I think putting time on your calendar for investing in yourself, and I think that, part of that is maybe it's time for your online learning, but it could also be on just other hobbies that you want to develop. So thinking about like how can you invest in yourself, both from a creative side, from a professional side, and constantly leveling up yourself. I think the other thing that people would do well and maybe putting a little more time is just time to think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think oftentimes we're just we have so many emails and meetings and other things that we're trying to deal with. So what is that time that we're spending really thinking and just saying, do I have time marked off to think? I have these problems, these things that I need to process. Dedicating time to that too is another thing.
I read a book recently. It's called The 5 a.m. Club.
Oh, nice.
It's by a guy named Robin Sharma, but it talks about taking an hour for yourself, and his whole thing is do it at 5 a.m. Actually, get up early and sort of dedicate that time to exercise, to think, to journal, and to learn.
Nice.
I started reading it in the fall. It was an audiobook, and it's completely changed the way that I sort of view my days. Actually, I think going into your days when you've planned and prepared, rather than waking up and jumping right into it, has been kind of a life changer in some ways. So I'll probably include his book in the liner notes. Funny that we talked about that, but everyone's got their own systems. Everyone's got their own ways in which they do it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that has occurred to me recently too is like every day I try and do three things. Think about what can I do for myself? What can I do for my business or my employer, I guess? And
Mm-hmm.
then what can I do for my community?
Nice.
And so for me, as long as I can sit back at the end of the day, by the time I'm going to sleep, and I can pick out just one thing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where was an obstacle? Where did I move the ball forward in each one of those three areas? I feel like I've accomplished something, and I feel like I'm going to do something, then plan out what you can do for the next day. But those sort of three pieces of the pie is what I've sort of viewed as something important for me.
Yeah, that's great. And I always say with any of these systems, it's like whatever works for you. And if it's like, hey, that hour or 2 hours or whatever you want to spend is like late at night, or I think, putting that time aside and like, how do you want to look at it as like, what am I doing this week versus what am I doing today? So figure out a system that works for you and just stick to it.
So bring it back to education. You and I were talking before this. You talked about a flipped model, and
Yes.
I've heard of that. Could you define that a little bit?
Yeah, so the idea of a flipped classroom is getting more and more popular, although still most universities are not accepting of it. Typically, you go to a class, you're sitting there, it's a one to many situation. You have a lecturer, the instructor that's lecturing to the class, right? The idea with a flipped classroom model is okay, consume your videos or other type of lecture one to many content offline, like not in person. And then when you're in class, it's whatever activities or projects or things like that are being done there.
Right.
Because like we can all just like watch a YouTube video of some instructor at a board talking, pontificating
Hmm.
and get as much, right? Like, and I think this is one of the things that I'm a big believer in is some people are better consuming things in an audio format. Some people are better at like they love the visual, the video type aspect. Some people like to just read information. So giving people a choice of different ways to consume the same type of content and it more easily resonates with them. And again, they'll be more likely to do it. They'll enjoy it more when they're doing it. They'll remember it better. They'll act upon it better. So again, like thinking about how educational institutions can realize, hey, it's not one size fits all. Your students are your customers. And so, how do you create an environment that's good for your customers? And then, hey, if you're going to be charging so much for tuition when they're coming to class, like let's get some engagement and what's that activity. And then the nice thing about the flipped classroom model is it's much easier to also then convert that into an online entire type of module because then you're thinking of just like right now when we're doing this with this university, we're doing it in both capacities of an in-person perspective and an online perspective for the same learning. And so right away we're like, okay, how can we still bring value offline or like the online format and the online where they can both benefit from the different perspectives, but they're both in the same cohort type model or where everyone's going through the same class at the same time, whether it's online or whether it's offline.
Yeah.
I think it'd be better for more universities.
Yeah.
And partly it's like, let's be honest, like most instructors are so used to standing up in front of a classroom and getting on a board and writing down things or that kind of thing. So it's adjusting what people are used to doing is tough.
Yeah, well, and not even in college. I had actually heard a school in Washington, D.C. did this, where they completely flipped the model.
Mm-hmm.
And, typically you give students homework and they're sitting there doing their homework on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea was like, give them the lecture while they're outside of the classroom. And then when they're in the classroom, it's you do your homework. Yeah, and then you can collaborate with each other. And I remember listening to that, and I'm like, that's brilliant. Why are more even high schools not even doing this?
Yeah, I think everyone should because I mean, one is like then like you have the benefit of engagement, like hey, people are there together, and one of it's like certain programs like MBA programs are really good at like team-based learning, right? Like that's a big focus. But I think partly is maybe our society is we're very like, hey, how is Justin? Like we need to grade you individually. Well, I think
Mm,
in general in this world more and more we need to be graded as like how do we perform in teams? How do we as a team succeed or fail?
yeah.
And I think that'd be a better mentality for us generally as opposed to grading so much individually. But again, these things are tough to change, especially inertia is a tough thing to change, right? So
Well, we've done education, in the country here for hundreds of years now. But it starts small. I have a friend teaches a course out in the Cleveland area, and his whole thing is it's not really even in the classroom.
nice.
They actually go to industry. They'll go to the Cleveland Indians and talk to them about statistics and baseball. They'll go to Goodyear Tire and they'll actually meet with people from Goodyear in Goodyear facility to basically talk about what's the future of autonomous vehicles and autonomous travel, because that's what Goodyear is thinking about. So the students are actually going out into the field, meeting with these people that are doing some very interesting things around technology and emerging trends, and they're getting themselves sort of immersed in it. And yeah, they wouldn't learn that if they were just sitting in a classroom reading about it. So I really love what he's doing there, and in some ways, yeah, I want to try and build a similar class here in like the Twin Cities. But it definitely makes for a completely different learning experience.
Certain things are going to resonate more with others. I do remember even when I was in high school, in my chemistry course, we went to a lot of different settings in the community, like a Duracell factory, and where you'd see that in person. And actually, here in the Twin Cities, I remember when you had organized a trip around different IoT stuff around the silicon wafer stuff, and like I think there's a lot like when you start like physically touching things and talking to people, and you start picturing things in a different light. So I think whether you're a kid or you're an adult, in the field sort of experience makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that was that. We just kind of built this Twin Cities manufacturing tour, I think is
Yes.
what it was, right? We rented a van and it was like a dozen of us hopped in there and we drove all around to
Yes.
various places that were doing, some of them had molds that they were doing, but the other ones were basically manufacturing PCBs. And
Mhm.
It's funny. It's yeah, man. That goes back quite some time because you never hear of these places, right? And then all of a sudden there's a warehouse or something, and you actually get a chance to go inside, and you're like, wow, this is what's going on inside here. These guys are cranking out circuit boards,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
People actually are making stuff here, which we don't realize all the things that are really being done. But I think then, whether you're a kid or whether you're an adult, then you can put yourself into which things do you really resonate with. And I think some people feel like that discounts the education, like the instructor is doing less work if
Mm,
they're not doing the instruction as much. But I think no, like curating good content, whether it's good content that you're putting in front of people digitally or whether it's good content bring people into a live setting or tours or things like that, that I think is a better, more important thing. And then how do you also then apply that learning is the other component that I think good instructors can do a much better job of, and focus less on the more traditional, like I need to be in front of a board and do this. Like, how can I get good content, get my students a lot of experiences that they're going to be able to picture themselves in that, and then also how do they actually apply some of these things.
yeah. What's your thoughts on like internships? Have you been exposed to those? Have you had interns at your company? Have you trained students that have gone out and done internships? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a challenge because internships vary so much, right? And I've had internships when I've been with interns when I've been with big companies. I did one internship a long time ago myself, but it's been like when I was in school, right?
Hmm.
But when I think of internships, I think in general most internships, and I think it's somewhat on job cycle where it's like, are you trying to wine and dine the person to get them to say yes and make sure it's a good fit, so to speak,
Hmm. Yeah.
versus are you trying to really give them a good experience and a learning experience, but also something that's going to do real work for the company? So Minnesota Deed, right?
Mm.
The economic development here in Minnesota, they have this program, the dual apprentice program, right? So it's the idea is basically applied learning, where there's grants and funding that's available for this, but the idea is companies would be able to get educational resources, but it would be applied in the real job setting. So I think more of that apprentice model where it's really like an apprenticeship,
Hmm.
as opposed to, I feel like most internships are not really apprenticeships and they are not a realistic view of things and give people a fair perspective of things,
Hmm.
which I don't think is helpful to anyone. I do see more people trying to emulate, like even that boot camp down in Dallas. I mean, that's what
Hmm.
they're trying to do. They're trying to do a real apprenticeship type model. There's a couple of those boot camps where I think there's no cost for the boot camps to attend. I think there's one out in New York and somewhere else where there's no cost to attend, but as part of it, basically, then they're going to be selling your time, your because you're going to learn some skills, and then they're going to like get some work, and they're basically going to be selling your time and getting the money for selling your time during the program.
Oh, sure.
So sort of a different sort of model to say, instead of having to pay for the program, the 15,000 or whatever that type of boot camp might be, you're not going to have to pay that, but you're going to be basically paying with your applied learning.
Yeah, sure, sure. Are you familiar with the SciTech experience here in the Twin Cities?
I don't know if I am.
It's a similar program as the deed, from what I know, and we've participated in that at Lab 651 for the past couple summers. And what it basically does is it gives you, I think, up to $5,000 to the employer to basically, you pay the student,
Mhm.
but then you end up getting, it's either 2,500 or $5,000. I can't remember exactly, that you can essentially get as a grant to then help pay for the student. So it's a no-brainer, number one, and then also it's focused a lot on science and technology, right? So a lot of these are our STEM students, or they're in the STEM field, and there's no cost to the student, really. They literally just have to make sure that they put their resume through the SciTech Experience website, and then me as an employer, I can hire them, and then once at the end of the summer, I can basically go to SciTech and say, look, here's everything I paid the student, and they will reimburse me for it. So
Nice.
really awesome program, and highly recommend it. But
Cool.
yeah, I mean, any way you can sort of lower that barrier, or that bar, to have an employer be able to take on an intern, because in some ways it can be a little bit of a distraction, I guess. It
Mhm.
depends on your company and your business model. I have a tough time being able to sort of bill these students out to a client because they're still sort of learning, and so customers come to us because we're the experts, but it's all factored into our business model. And I love having students there. I never had a chance to be an intern anywhere. I got done with school with a math and physics degree, and I'm like, what does a person do? Right? I mean, I didn't really know what the landscape was. I didn't get a chance to go out and be an actuary, for example, or teach or whatever it is, what I was going to do after my school. And I ended up loving computers anyways along the way, even though I didn't really get a computer science degree. And that's how I ended up falling into my career. But I think a lot of people, it would do them well to see what the world's like before they spend 4, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it is, in school, and $100,000 in debt or whatever it is, to then finally realize, hey, this isn't for me. So earlier you can get students out to experience what it's like, I'm all for that for sure.
Yeah, and I know like engineering programs generally are very good at that. At most of the universities that I've known with big engineering programs, where they're like whether it's mechanical, electrical, those type of programs, where they've built up such a history of that. But I also think we have a lot more career changing happening nowadays. I've known a lot of people that have wanted to do like, hey, can I do an internship in their second or third careers? And they're looking for those opportunities. And a lot of times internships are viewed at like, hey, that's something like a 19, 20-year-old, 21-year-old might be going through. And so
Right.
then it sort of feels awkward in that sense. But I think like, creating more opportunities to let people change. I mean, I think people have a lot of skills to bring to the table oftentimes, and how do you make that transition easier for them? So I'm thinking about even like career changers too, and especially as we know, like there's constant disruption that's occurring in different markets and different places. So how do you help people not just skill up, but also that internship aspect, that applied learning aspect is such a valuable thing to actually get them to a level where they're more valuable too.
Right, for sure. Well, how do we tie this back to artificial intelligence, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the questions, right? Like having more of those opportunities. Like, I think there's so much great online learning, and like, how do you bring more of that online learning into applied settings, whether it's benefiting social causes, whether it's benefiting nonprofits, whether it's benefiting small or medium-sized business that aren't going to be able to afford that, those types of things. I think that there's opportunities out there. Certainly, like bigger companies, medium-sized companies, they'll have enough. They hire interns, they do things like that. I think there might be an opportunity out there to say, okay, there's a lot of people learning a lot of cool things out there, and they want to apply that to good causes. So maybe there's an opportunity for somebody to do something there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about competitions like Kaggle competitions, but there's also ones, there have been local groups here in town, a group called Star 82 that did a lot of work with nonprofits, right? And I'm not sure if you probably attended those meetings and were a part of some of those things. And I was a part of a teams a couple times where the whole purpose of it was to get a bunch of data scientists together to work with a nonprofit that could honestly not afford to pay for a person like this on staff. So kind of a win-win-win, it feels like, with regards to the nonprofits win, the people that are attending, they end up learning something new, and at the end of the day they can show possibly even a resume builder to get themselves more and more into this field.
Yeah, exactly. And I think more like, more at scale, exactly what Star 82 did, or there's some other groups that have done some of those types of things too, where I think, how do you create it so, because there's so many different organizations that could benefit from this. And part of it's like a lot of these organizations don't even know they could benefit from this type of thing. So I think there is an opportunity there. And I think the Nerdery had as part of their Nerdery Foundation, they were trying to do something in this realm and was matching up sort of tech talent in general with nonprofits. And of course, the challenge, of course, is like matching up people with the right skills with the right need, and doing that. And it's harder when I think there's these terms like artificial intelligence or analytics, because oftentimes somebody's like, well, hey, I know how to do this, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not at all related, and they don't have the domain expertise, and it's just not, so I think there's got to be something out there, an opportunity to help bridge that gap. But I think there's so many organizations that could benefit from this, and there's also a need to say, hey, you can go through some Kaggle competitions, but I think
Right.
that's such a defined problem that there isn't much, certainly you gain skill from trying to optimize your model and do things like, but I think it's a more technical application as opposed to what a real problem would be.
Well, because a lot of it is just trying to define what data you need, getting that data, that can be a challenge, a project in of its own.
To be honest, when I'm getting to nonprofits, some of the ones that I've worked with, especially like the smaller ones, a lot of the biggest thing is just they oftentimes just don't even think like know what questions to ask and thinking about, and a lot of it's just those discussions with them, and a lot of times they don't even have the data, they haven't been keeping the data. Well, yeah, we kept the last 6 months of this, and but of course, so
Yeah.
they've been writing over the other stuff, like or getting rid of it, and so I think a lot of that initial thing is just like talking through problems and talking about potential opportunities and understanding pain points, and it's sort of being that consultant with them first, and then figuring out what are those small wins and how do you keep developing. Certainly when you're bigger organizations don't have this problem, but I think as you said, is like how do you bridge the gap of trying to apply learning versus also at the same time maybe helping some community need.
Yeah. Well, do you think, just as I've been thinking about artificial intelligence in general, I mean, is there a world where we don't have teachers anymore, where a physical human teacher, right, where it can be
Mhm.
automated, I
Well, it's
guess?
interesting. So, like one of the things I've been doing as I like a Duolingo, right? So Duolingo is something with a language learning,
Hmm.
and there is no teacher there, right? It's all app based. It's listens to how you pronounce. It gives input on like here's a mistake you made, things like that. It's all been done that way, right?
Yeah.
Now, certainly my level, like I've been trying to take a little Chinese and a little Arabic, some things like other than Spanish that I'm better versed at. And certainly like some things I can see how like it does a really good job in some aspects. I think there's something to be said, just like, do we want a robot cooking our food and doing this? I mean, I think all these types of things of are we as humans valuing what creativity and just like that there's somebody else that cares on the other side.
Mm,
And like I do think a lot of the education, a lot of the realm in education, while maybe it's not getting rid of all people, maybe it's just scaled where it's like, hey, and Ring's really good at teaching this,
hmm.
and he can now teach this to a million people
Yeah.
and doing this right now. I'm actually just taking for the first time. So Seth Godin, who has
Yeah.
Kimball and things like that, I'm taking one of his workshops right now,
Oh,
and it's they scale at a fairly large size,
all right.
but they have coaches that sort of like in each cohort.
Mm, okay,
And
sure.
so the idea is still having people there, and that you're doing it with other people you're going through. And so I do wonder how much it's like, okay, you and I are going through something together where we're each sort of almost coaching each other and helping each other.
Hmm.
And I think that model I could see definitely working without a official instructor.
Hmm.
Like there's like sort of team-based coaching, but I also think there's also the aspects of personalized learning. So the more that something knows where my weak spots are and where my strengths are, that it's going to be better at helping me out on those things that when you hear from somebody else make that mistake, it's different when they hear me making that mistake because they have that total history there. And so I think there is something to be said about that, especially when you're talking about learning for kids, especially as like year after year, they're sort of passed off to other teachers. And like,
Yeah.
how can we make teachers better? So one of the ideas that I've like, and I'm sure Google and others would be the people that are best versed to do this, but is around just a general personalized assistant. Now we have
Mm,
Google Assistants and Series and these things like that, but something that really knows me, like that is personal to me. That personal assistant knows my medical background, knows my interests, knows my everything, and it's basically like my virtual assistant.
yeah.
And I think the same thing on a teaching side is like, who is your virtual teacher? Like having something like that works together in tandem with your normal people instructors.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial.
Yeah.
So how can we take normal teachers and really upskill them because they have this virtual assistant that also knows the student and some of the gaps, and they can remind like, hey, well, remember little Jimmy, he has these problems and it's like this. Maybe we need to do something here.
I love it. No, that is a great concept. Yeah, because you're right. At some point, it just becomes all about scale, and teachers are only good. They have a maximum theoretical limit, right? Whether it's 32 students in the classroom or 9 months out of the year, whatever. There's a limit
Yes.
where a teacher can only have so much impact. So if they can do less of the mundane stuff, or at least be reminded of things that strengthens their superpower, quote unquote, which
Mhm.
would be like their humanness, then I think students would definitely benefit from all of that.
Plus, you have this longevity in your life of something that's known your development throughout, and so it's not just like a 1 year time where this teacher sees you for a year and then you're off in the next teacher, right? So these teachers see blocks of your life as an individual. They don't have a good perspective of what's that longer trajectory for that student, and I think it's just seeing how test scores were in first grade or fifth grade or other things are not, I think, broad enough representation of who that individual is and what their strengths and weaknesses may be.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, this has been great. It's been a great conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to share around, I guess, AI and education or the topic?
No, I think the nice thing is there's so much great stuff out there. So I just tell people to try it out, and if you like something, great. If you don't, like, just stop listening to it. There's so many Coursera courses that I've started and I thought it was going to be cool, and then I was like, I really don't like this one. So at the same time, there's some that I was like, I took like on a whim, and I was like, wait a sec, this is like really cool. And one of the things, just even YouTube, like go on YouTube and there's just tons of great stuff. And you don't want to go down too much the trap. I think the other thing I would caution to people is you can learn without doing all your life, but you also want to do too. So you can always learn more, but try to think of how do you improve your community. Is there a nonprofit you can benefit? Is there an entrepreneurial idea you might have that you could apply this to? I think the more that you can sort of take this and apply it, whatever that is, whether it's data visualization or whether it's neural net, think of ways that you can actually apply it that's gonna do something to the world.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. If you have an itch to scratch, chances are somebody else has that same itch.
Yes.
And in some ways, and yeah, I don't know, there's a drive there if you're solving a problem that you run into rather than solving it because the Kaggle competition says so, right?
Yes.
If you can point to, geez, this is something that I wish I could love to apply artificial intelligence to.
Mhm.
Let's figure it out.
Yeah, I think of like all the things in agriculture and other spaces nowadays that there's tons of great advancements happening because people are like, I'm just going to take some pictures of plants or I'm going to go do this. Like, this is a problem. We know that artificial intelligence is able to do this pretty well and just like, get out and do it. So,
Yeah. And I think just with regards to like right now, there's a lot of hacks going on around COVID-19,
mhm.
right? So there's so many different data hacks, and there's actually a website called DevPost. You're probably familiar with it, but we use that for our IoT Hack Day. But there's just hundreds and hundreds of projects out there that you can just join.
Yeah.
Right. They're looking for teams. There's actually some money to be made, not a lot, but there are prizes on these competitions. And it's just a fun place to check out projects. And so I'll include links to that too as well in this. But that's just places you can just sort of scroll around and find a project you think that's interesting and raise your hand and say, hey, these are the skills I have. Can I join your team?
Yes. Great suggestion.
Well, great, Dave. Thank you again for all the great conversation, and good luck with all the education and all the work you're doing.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
You've listened to another episode of the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. We hope you are eager to learn more about applying artificial intelligence and deep learning within your organization. You can visit us at appliedai.mn to keep up to date on our events and connect with our amazing community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Justin at appliedai.mn if you are interested in participating in a future episode. Thank you for listening.